Hey there, folks. Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone. It's Saturday, and I'm in Kyiv at my hotel. We've been working on a documentary about Russian atrocities this week, and getting some really interesting interviews. And that's going to come out as like a 5-part series on Newsmax. Today, I'm doing a lot of live broadcasting from the balcony out here, talking about this report that's come out from Amnesty International that talks about the fact that Ukrainian troops have been putting civilians at risk in their tactics by locating their troops in and among the civilian populace around the country as they fight the Russians. And it really takes the Ukrainians to task for that. And understandably, Ukrainians are very upset about this, the tone of this report and the way it was written. They say that it really plays into the propaganda efforts of Moscow, which it does. And even if it were true that there's a difference between troops being located where there are civilians and troops being located using civilians as human shields. So, for example, in the east, in Donbass, what we've seen since the beginning of the war is that the Ukrainian military comes in, tells the civilians it's time to evacuate. They help the civilians evacuate. They get the civilians out of there as much as they can. And there are always civilians who choose to stay, but that's their choice. They're like, well, you know, it's a free country. If you want to stay, you can stay, but we will help you to leave and go somewhere else. There are resources for you, et cetera, et cetera. Many people, just like they would in the States, say, well, I've lived here my whole life. I'm not leaving now. Some of the people, not more than some, even a lot of the people who stay are actually friendly to the Russians because they identify more as Russian than they do as Ukrainian. Again, that goes back to the Holodomor in the 1930s when Russia basically killed off all the Ukrainians in that region and then moved Russians in to ethnic Russians to work the fields in Ukraine. And those Russians are still there. That's only a couple generations removed from today. And there's still people alive who remember that. And certainly a lot of people will tell you about the stories their grandparents told of surviving the Holodomor. So that's still very close to their history here. Bottom line is that the first thing the Ukrainians do when they go into an area where there's going to be fighting and they're going to have a lot of troops is they try to get the civilians to leave. There's a tactical reason for that because they don't want some of these civilians who are friendly to Russia to be passing along information about where they are. And they don't want to get civilians killed if there's fighting. Now, again, you have to put these troops up somewhere. They don't have bases. They don't have military bases all over their country, especially where in these areas where the fighting is, that were pre-built. Like it's not like you could send the troops to Fort Benning, and there's fighting in Maine or something. You'd have to go to Maine and you'd have to find a place to put them up there. And so they're not quartering them with civilians per se, but they might go to an abandoned apartment building and take over the whole building and fill it full of troops. It's not a great tactic, but it's kind of the only thing they have in a lot of cases to put up that many troops in one spot. So if the Russians then find out they're there and start shooting missiles at that area to try to blow that thing up, what we do know is that the Russians' missiles are very inaccurate. And so they very often hit areas that are populated by civilians and the civilians die. Now, what the Ukrainians are saying is that you cannot blame Ukrainian troops for the inaccuracy of Russian missiles. Because if the Russians find out that they're in building A and they try to bomb building A, but they hit building Z down the road, and that's what's happening, it's not the Ukrainians' fault. And the Ukrainians are, from what I have seen, they're trying very hard to keep their armor and their artillery and all those things that would make big targets outside of the city limits, out in the countryside, in fields and forests and things like that. But so you cannot blame the Ukrainian military, that's what they're saying, for this happening, for when civilians get killed. The Ukrainian military is doing whatever they can do, they say, to minimize civilian casualties, and I believe them. They don't have any reason to cause civilian casualties, and they're certainly not using civilians as human shields. I can virtually guarantee you that. They are very patriotic. They see these people as their countrymen. But this Amnesty International report, which is saying that Ukrainian troops are being housed in buildings that are surrounded by civilian buildings, well, yeah, that's the only buildings there are in many of these areas. Maybe they'll take over a school. That doesn't mean they're putting school kids at risk. The kids are not in school. So it's not like they're putting them in there with children and using the children as human shields. They're not. This report did not clarify that, and so it was poorly written, and I would say that because of that, it qualifies as misinformation. That misinformation, unfortunately, is giving lots of ammo to the Russian propaganda machine, the information battle space. That's like Amnesty International just sent a bunch of HIMARS in the information battle space to the Russians so that they can bomb the Ukrainians. I mean, there's no moral equivalence here between the Ukrainians doing what they have to do to try to house their people and keep them warm and fed, and the Russians using inaccurate projectiles to try to bomb those people and ending up killing civilians. It's not the Ukrainians' fault. Morally, it's the Russians' fault, no matter what, because the Ukrainians didn't attack anybody else's country. That's just all there is to it. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. The head of the Ukrainian arm of Amnesty International actually resigned over this, and with good reason. And for its part, Amnesty International is standing behind what they said. They're saying, we're just trying to, push the Ukrainians to do better. Well, that's not really the way to do it. This is a really good way to prolong this war, to give the Russians more ammunition to feed to their populace, to make it look like the Russians are justified in what they're doing, because they're not. That's all there is to it. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Keep watching Newsmax. I'll be talking about it more, and we'll keep you posted on everything that's going on here. Thanks for watching. I'm Chuck Holton.